Hello, I'm Matt Galloway, and this is the Current Podcast.
This is a dark moment for America. Charlie Kirk traveled the nation, joyfully engaging with everyone interested in good faith debate. His mission was to bring young people into the political process, which he did better than anybody ever, to share his love of country and to spread the simple words of common sense. On campuses nationwide, he championed his ideas with courage, logic, humor, and grace.
U.S. President Donald Trump remembered Charlie Kirk in a video posted on Truth Social last night. The prominent conservative activist was shot and killed yesterday at an event he was hosting at Utah Valley University. The 31-year-old Kirk had built a massive following on social media, and his group Turning Point USA has been credited with ensuring that Donald Trump returned to the White House. Last year, in the weeks leading up to the U.S. election, I was on the campus of Arizona State University in Tucson during one of Charlie Kirk's rallies. Here's a little bit of how people there saw him. Why are you here on a Wednesday night?
To support the conservatives and Charlie Kirk. I believe what he's doing is a great thing, going around college campuses and spreading the word.
Charlie Kirk's a really open-minded guy. Everything he provides is with statistics and evidence. I'm just trying to get more educated.
I've always been a big fan of Charlie Kirk. I follow him on social media. I think it's very good for him to come to college campuses because there's a lot of kids that don't know why Trump should be president.
Charlie Kirk is one of the greatest minds I've ever come across. I think he has a ton of great ideas without even a college degree. I think what he's doing, getting young people involved in voting and getting them to the conservative side of things, is what we need to change the country. And I'm with him all the way.
Katie Simpson is the CBC's Washington correspondent. She is in Washington, D.C. Katie, good morning.
Good morning.
Bring us up to speed on what we know about what happened yesterday.
The biggest push right now is the FBI really looking for any information they can find about who is behind this shooting, the motivation for it. A couple of suspects had been taken into custody, but both were released. And so the reporting is right now, it really is starting back at square one as they try to track down who is responsible. Right now, that is the main focus. If that's what's going on in terms of the investigation side, we're also watching the political fallout in this moment. You played a clip from Donald Trump mourning the loss of Charlie Kirk. But in that same 4-minute video he posted on Truth Social hours after Charlie Kirk was killed, he also blamed what he called the, quote, radical left for using rhetoric that demonizes people, leading to the political violence that the world witnessed yesterday.
I want to come back to that reaction in a moment. For Canadians who may not know Charlie Kirk, who was he and why and how was he so influential?
Charlie Kirk was one of the most influential people when it comes to the MAGA media movement. Think of all the culture wars in America. He really stoked those. He was unapologetically far right on the vast majority of all of those American culture wars, those really deeply divisive issues. He would advocate for things like women leaving the workforce instead to have children and raise families. He was, a person who would promote what was called the Great Replacement Theory, believing that immigrants were going to replace white Americans, a lot of beliefs that stoked a lot of divisions and were widely condemned in some circles. But he became a huge ally of Donald Trump because Charlie Kirk had a really strong following among young Americans, particularly young men, people who might not vote. And he created this conservative political action group called Turning Point USA, where he would go to college campuses or he would engage with young people through social media, through debates, and really bring them into the conservative movement. He would go into spaces where conservative voices typically were not and try to bring more people into the conservative movement. His debate style was very aggressive, very pointed. He would give a microphone to people in the audience and say, prove me wrong. And some of those moments, those debates, they would go garner millions of views online. And so he had a massive platform. He is credited with getting Donald Trump on TikTok TikTok. And Donald Trump has on multiple occasions thanked him for connecting him with younger voters. So he was a massive presence in sort of the MAGA ecosystem. And that is why you're seeing such a reaction from the president, as well as others in the conservative movement in this moment in the United States.
Can you just talk a bit more about what he was able to tap into among young people? I mean, we saw it there in Tucson about a year ago, and we were out in front of this rally. We couldn't go in because they wouldn't let the media in. So we stood outside and we just talked to hundreds and hundreds of people, young men, young women, people who'd come from this all over the state, but also all over the country to hear him. What was he giving them?
It was really, he would sort of, it was a space where he would give space to grievance in some situations. And that is something that we've seen sort of weaponized in the United States. But it's not just that. He had an ability to speak to people in a way that they weren't hearing from other sort of political leaders or political figures in the United States. And it was deeply divisive. We are existing in a moment where, call it the attention economy, and the biggest outrage and the biggest sort of the loudest noises get the most attention. And he created a lot of content, and there's nothing to indicate that his beliefs were not authentic, that he was doing this just for attention. This is something that he had been pushing for since he was a teenager. He was politically active in terms of pushing conservative, deeply conservative, far-right causes for more than a decade. He was only 31 years old. And he had an ability to speak to younger people in a way that others were not. And at times it sort of, gave rise to sort of the way that we're seeing grievance weaponized at times in America. And that's sort of a lot of what it is.
We're going to speak more about this moment of political violence in the United States in just a moment. But how are leaders, you mentioned Trump's reaction blaming what he calls the radical left for creating the conditions that led to Charlie Kirk's death. How are leaders across the political spectrum reacting to this?
So there has been widespread condemnation with both Republicans and Democrats saying there's no place for political violence in America. And when you disagree with someone's political view, violence is not the answer. That is something that we are hearing widely across the political spectrum. But there was a moment in the House of Representatives yesterday that sort of sparked the underlying tension that is existing in this moment. Speaker Mike Johnson called for a moment of prayer on the floor. And as that was happening, there was some squabbling back and forth, and it was interrupted, and he had to call for order. And some Republicans, one specifically, a representative from Florida, she left the chamber and came out and spoke to reporters and blamed Democrats and said, listen, we can't even have this moment, and said, you want to know why we're experiencing this moment of political violence? It's the other side that demonizes people that you disagree with. You call them Nazis. You compare them to all these sort of horrible figures, and then we exist in this moment of political violence. That's the rhetoric we are hearing from some, not all, from some on one side of the argument here, and you can expect to hear more of that as we go.
You're there in the United States. I mean, just finally, how tense is the situation? People are watching this, and it's a raw moment just broadly in that country. But what will you be watching for from his supporters? He, again, was able to activate this large group of young people, and people just wonder what that's going to look like in the wake of this.
We are living in America in a moment of intense political violence, and really the big question is what comes next. And it's a big, how are people going to respond to this? When you take a look at what's happened in maybe the past 16 months alone, so you've got what happened to Charlie Kirk, the Minnesota lawmaker who was gunned down in her home. You've got an assassination attempt on Donald Trump, the assassination attempt of the Democratic governor of Pennsylvania, and that's just a few in the last year or so. And it's really an intense, divisive, and at times very frightening moment. And the concern is, will violence spark more violence? And that is really the fear right now.
Katie, thank you very much for this.
Thanks.
Katie Simpson, the CBC's Washington correspondent. Matthew Dalek is an historian and professor of political management at George Washington University. His latest book is Birchers, How the John Birch Society Radicalized the American Right. Matthew, good morning to you.
Good morning.
What was your reaction when you heard the news that Charlie Kirk had been shot dead in Utah?
Well, it was. I was horrified. I mean, it was. It's hard to put in words. It's a sick event, I think anybody who hears about it, let alone watches the video, which is widely circulating in social media, has got to be revolted. At the same time, there's an element in which this is just the latest, as your reporter was saying. Sadly, the latest in a increasingly long list of politically inspired acts of violence, and so there's a sadness too. It's quite disturbing.
As you understand it, and pick up a little bit on what Katie was saying, how did Charlie Kirk fit into the MAGA movement, but also, given what he was doing on college campuses and debating people, prove me wrong, what have you, what was he able to activate in young people?
Well, I think he was able to really be part of a kind of counterculture, right? We think about the counterculture as being of the left, but going to college campuses, being a young, conservative, pro-Trump, pro-MAGA, wearing what they defined as patriotism on their sleeve, there was a kind of, I think, rush in that idea. And Charlie Kirk kind of tapped into that sensibility, that sense, your reporter's talking about grievance, the sense that among institutions of higher education, conservatives are in the minority. And he was able to raise, sort of do what William Buckley, the famous conservative intellectual of the mid-20th century, Charlie Kirk was able to kind of do something of what William Buckley was able to do by making conservatism, making MAGA cool to young people.
How do you see this moment of political violence? Katie ran through some of the incidents. You have the murder of a lawmaker in Minnesota. You have the governor of Pennsylvania, Josh Shapiro. His house is set on fire. You have the president himself facing an assassination attempt, Paul Pelosi, beaten in his home in San Francisco. And that's just some of the incidents. It feels to some people that political violence has spilled over. Is this moment different than moments in past?
I think it is. And to me, it feels as if we are living in the most politically violent time since the 1960s and early 1970s.
What do you think is behind that?
Well, a lot of things are behind it. One, I think, important development is that in the United States, opponents have become not just political foes, but the enemy within. And when the rhetoric, political rhetoric, attacks the other side as being really the greatest threat to the United States, it becomes easier for individuals who are mentally unwell to take that next step, to want to destroy, to kill these enemies, these great dangers. Obviously, the United States is awash in guns. The gun problem has worsened, not improved. I think that there's a deep cynicism as well about institutions, elites, and political leaders. And so when former presidents, as they did yesterday, come out in unison and condemn this horrific act, it has to compete now with, first of all, I'm not sure how many people are listening to them, right, as authorities, but then it also has to compete with these other voices calling for war and blaming the other side. And then finally, obviously, social media acts as an accelerant. It sort of brings out the worst in people and it inspires, I think, copycat events and acts of revenge.
You mentioned former presidents. How about the current president? This is what President Donald Trump posted on Truth Social last night. Have a listen.
It's a long past time for all Americans and the media to confront the fact that violence and murder are the tragic consequence of demonizing those with whom you disagree day after day, year after year, in the most hateful and despicable way possible. For years, those on the radical left have compared wonderful Americans like Charlie to Nazis and the world's worst mass murderers and criminals. This kind of rhetoric is directly responsible for the terrorism that we're seeing in our country today, and it must stop right now.
Matthew Dallek, how do you respond to that?
Well,
that's a big sign.
Yeah, I mean, look, obviously on the left, there's clearly a grain of truth, right? There are some voices on the left that are celebrating the murder of Charlie Kirk, that are calling Trump and his allies fascists. But of course, it ignores, Trump's own, and I don't think this is a partisan comment. I just think it's sort of the recent historical reality, which is, Trump has a record, he speaks in one key, and his key is inflammatory. And the question is how loud it's going to be. He's the president who's called his opponents scum, the media, the enemy of the people, immigrants poisoning the blood of the country, said January 6th was a day of love. One of his first acts in office was to pardon over 1,000 rioters at the Capitol on January 6th, including rioters who beat police. And, one coda to that is apparently on social media yesterday, Enrique Tarrio, a leader of the Proud Boys, who was convicted of sedition against the United States, posted in response to another January 6th rioter, war. So, we're living in a very fraught time, and the president is much more adept at inflaming, I think, the already large divisions in the United States.
So, if it's not the president, who has the moral authority to turn the heat down in your country?
Yeah, it's very hard to think about a Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who, as he learned of Martin Luther King's killing, was in Indianapolis and gave one of the great speeches impromptu of the 1960s. And he was obviously gunned down shortly thereafter. But there are few voices, in part because, Americans don't like politicians. They don't trust politicians. They have come, I think, to distrust institutions. And so, a robust democracy needs individual leaders and institutions that can try to contain extremist ideas and extremist individuals through words and deeds. And the United States, I think, is suffering from a dearth of that currently. There are some voices, including, Mondami, the leading mayoral candidate in New York City, gave a very powerful nonpartisan speech last night, but condemning this horrific act. But, it's unclear how much this resonates among the majority of Americans.
I have to let you go, but just in a few words, what are you most worried about in this moment?
Well, obviously, acts of retribution, ratcheting up of the rhetoric, continued acts of violence, and that, we're not at the end of this period of violence, but really in the middle of it. That's
what you believe, that your country is in the middle of this period of violence?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes political violence can burn itself out in the United States in the past. It doesn't seem like that's going to happen anytime soon.
Matthew Dallek, we'll leave it there. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
Matthew Dallek is an historian and professor of political management at George Washington University. His latest book is Birchers, How the John Birch Society Radicalized the American Right. You've been listening to The Current Podcast. My name is Matt Galloway. Thanks for listening. I'll talk to you soon.